This video is intended as a really quick and very superficial introduction to the basic concepts of the new Formview control in the UX component. So the Formview control is the building block for tablet forms, and what we're going to demonstrate in this video is how to get started really quickly. So basically the Formview requires a data source, and the easiest way to create a data source for the Formview is to put a list control on the component. So I'm going to go here and choose a list control, and then I'm going to go and just set this list to have static data. So let's go here and then click sample data, and I'll just put in some name and address data, and then go over to my list layout and select the columns. And so now I'll just go here, I'll save this form 1 and preview it. So there's my list. So now let's go and add a Formview control to this component. So I'm going to go here to other controls, scroll down till I get to Formview, and then place the Formview control on the UX component. And then I'm going to click over here to configure the Formview. So we'll go here and choose our data source. Now the data source for the Formview could be a JSON object, or there's a whole bunch of different data sources, but the list is the easiest data source to work with, and we'll focus on that for the time being. So let's just choose list and then go and choose the list name, and so that's list number 1. So now this form has a data source which is list 1. So if we go look at the fields that this form has available to it, it's going to be the same fields that the list has, because of course the list is the data source. So there's the fields that we have for this form view. And then we're going to go here to the form layout, and I'm going to choose an incredibly simple layout, just nothing at all fancy. So I'll just go here to data controls and then choose those fields, click OK, and now let's go ahead and run the component. So when we click over here now, we can see that the form view now is rendered, and it's displaying the data from the first row in the list. So if I click on each row, you can see that the form view is updating. So at this point we have essentially a read-only form view. I cannot do any editing, and at this point there's nothing really spectacular about this form. It doesn't even look very good. But the basic concept is being demonstrated here, and that is that the form view displays HTML that gets populated from a data source. So the form view here represents a template that has been populated with data from the current row in the list control. So if we go back to the form view now, and we switch, and we'd go here and look at the layout, so you can see these are the controls. But if I switch to the freeform editor and then switch to low-level mode, we can see here that the interesting part about this is that this is just pure HTML, and inside this HTML are placeholders, and in particular here are the placeholders that we care about. So this is the field, the state field, that's being extracted from the data source. So in this case the state field from the list control is being put here into this HTML. So the form view is actually nothing more than just a fancy version of the client-side templating feature that has been in Alpha Anywhere for some time now. It's just that the template here is a little bit more complex, and we'll discuss that complexity in future videos. But in many cases you're not even going to bother switching to the freeform editor. You'll do almost all your work here in the Genie mode, where you can just specify the layout. So at this point now we've got a very simple form that with the detail view, but it's not an editable form, it's a read-only form, and it's just basically displaying data from the current row. And when I click on a row in the list, the template is rendered using the data from the current row. So we'll pause now and pick it up in the next video, where we turn this form from a read-only form into an editable form. So in this video we're going to continue with our introduction to the basic concepts of the form view control. So in the previous video we showed a read-only form view control that just simply displayed data from the current row in a list control in a read-only form. But one of the key aspects of the form, of course, is that it's intended to be editable. And unlike a standard list control with a detail view, where each detail view control is its own editable control, the form view control basically is based on the concept of shared editors. So while this particular form here has 4 controls, we can actually create a single editor that is going to be shared for all of these controls. Now in this case where there's only 4 controls, that's not really a big deal. But in real life forms where you could have hundreds of fields, the ability to share an editor among many fields ends up being very important and results in a very efficient UX component. So let's go now and make this form into an editable form by adding some editors to the form. So the basic idea behind editors is that editors are used to edit values in a form, and editors themselves live inside something called an editor set. So an editor set is a container for one or more editors. So I'm going to go now to this form and add an editor set. So I'll go here and I'll say I'll add a container, and I want this container to be an editor set, and I'll insert it after the form view. So now I've got basically an editor set with nothing in it, and the quickest way to create an editor for the form is to use one of the predefined controls. So I'm going to go here into this editor set and choose a really simple text box editor. So I'll place this editor inside the editor set, and I'm not going to bother right now describing what's going on over here. All we need to know is that we have an editor here called editor under bar 1 that lives inside editor set under bar 1. And so now what we need to do is go to our form and tell our form to use this editor. So I'm going to go back now to my form and then go to form properties. And then I'm going to go over to the fields tab, and you can see that for each field in our form there's a property that says what editor set do you want to use to edit this field and what editor. So I'm going to go to the first name field and say I'd like to use editor set 1 and then editor 1, but I'd like to actually apply this to all of the fields. So I'm going to just go there and select all of the fields and then click OK. And now let's go ahead and run this. So go there now, and when I click over here you can see that I have, when I click on John, basically there's the editor for John. If I click on Smith, there's the editor for Smith. If I click on Boston, there's the editor. So if I go there and change that to say Cambridge and then hit save, you can see the edited value gets saved back into the form. But I don't have yet any ability to put the edited form back into this the data source into the list. So let's go back now to our form design and then go over to our form layout and then go again now to add items, and I'm going to choose predefined controls, and I'll choose this button set here to save the form back to the data set. So I'll go ahead and click OK now and go over there. So click on the first row. So there's John. Let's make this Harry. Hit the save button. So now we've saved that edit back to the form. The form is dirty, so you can see the save button has become enabled, and if I hit the save button there, basically the data is pushed back into the actual data source itself. So we've shown now how you can go from a basic read-only form to a updatable form. Thanks very much for watching. We can take our read-only form and make it into an updatable form by putting an editor in an editor set and then specifying that all of the fields on the form use that editor. So in this case here we have a single editor that is being shared by 4 different form fields. Now, in this case, the editors are being displayed directly on the form, but in a real-world mobile application, you would typically have these editors in a panel that might animate in from the right-hand side when you tapped on a field in the form, or you might have the fields showing in a panel layout across the top of the screen, as we show in the reference application. But in this video here, we're just really focusing on basic concepts, so we're not trying to make the form look good or have any fancy behaviors. So when I basically click on this field over here, when I click on, say, Allison, we can see that the field itself updates and it says first name over there, and then it fills in the value. When I click on, say, last name, the label there updates to last name, and then the field value updates over there. And then if I go and type in a different value, let's go here and type in, say, Jones, then when I hit the save button, the data is put back into the form. The form itself goes dirty. The editor set itself is closed down, so if the editors had come in a panel, then that panel would have then navigated out of focus, and then the form itself goes dirty, and then the save button comes on, so I can now save the edit to the form back to the data source. So let's go now and look at what's happening behind the scenes when I click on a field there in the form. So first, when we basically save edits back to the form and then hit the save button to then go and save the form edits back to the data source, which in this case is the list, we can see here that by looking at the save button, that the code that got executed was a Formview commit, and then this is just a generic placeholder for the form ID, which in this particular case happens to be Formview 1. So that's the ID of the form. So when the user goes ahead and presses the save button over here, any edits to the form will be committed back to the data source for the form, which in this case is the list, and then we'll just refresh the form in case the list made any changes to the data when it was being saved. But more interesting is what happens when we click on a row in the form, how the editor itself gets updated, because what's going on over here is we have one editor that is being shared by 4 different fields on the form, but the editor, even though it's a shared editor, still has customized behavior. So for example, when I click on John, the label here says first name, but when I click on Smith, the label here says last name. So let's go and take a look at what's happening. So the editor set itself has events, but we haven't used any of those events, but we have basically specified auto commit, which means that when the editor set gets closed down, we want to basically automatically update the form view control. But the editor itself has a more interesting set of events right now. So the first event that's interesting is the set value in editor. So basically what this event is responsible for doing is taking the value from the form from the field that I clicked on in the form and putting that value into the editor. So when I go to the form here and I click on John, the editor gets filled up with John, but if I click on Smith, the editor there has Smith in it, and if I click on Boston, it has Boston. So basically the set value is what's responsible for doing that. And you can see here that what set value does is it gets past value, which is the value that I clicked on in the form. So this is a system variable, and that is the value of the field in the form that I clicked on. So let's just go back and run this quickly. And if I go here and I click on Smith, then that value field would be Smith. If I click on Boston, that value field is Boston. So then what it does is basically it sets the value of editor. So editor 1 text box is in fact the editor. So there inside our editor set over here, we have a standard text box control whose ID is editor1 text box. So when this editor is opened, the set value in editor event is fired, and the value that was clicked on in the form gets put into text box 1. So then the next question is, well, what caused editor 1's set value event to actually fire in the first place? So, and what happened there, in fact, is this. The form view, as you recall from an earlier video, has a bunch of fields, and then for each of these fields here we specified what editor is going to be used when the user taps on that field in the form. So when the user taps on the first name field, we've specified that editor set number 1 is going to be used, and then within that editor set, editor number 1 is going to be used. So when the user clicks on the first name field over here, then what happened is editor set number 1 got opened, and if we had had any code in the show JavaScript event, that would have fired. And then after editor set 1 got opened, then editor 1 got opened, and then this code here got executed. So that's the code there that caused editor 1 to actually show the value from the form and put it in there. Now when the user clicks the save button over here to save the edits back to the form, so the user goes here and types in, say, Mary, and then hits the save button, you can see that that edit got saved back to the form. So let's go take a look at what the code is on the save button here. So if we go to the click button, we can see that what the save button does is it gets a pointer to the editor set that editor 1 lives in. So we know that we're basically editing with editor set number 1. So this is just going to give us basically a pointer to the editor set that contains the current editor, and then what we're going to do is commit that editor set. So when we commit the editor set, the value in the editor gets written back into the form. So if you look here at the generated code, you can see it's more verbose than it has to be, because it's got error checking in it. But basically the idea is really simple, that essentially what we're doing is we're committing the editor set that editor number 1 lives in. So this code got just generated automatically for us when we chose the built-in editor text box from the predefined controls. So let's now continue exploring the different events in the editor and the editor set. So now we've looked at the set value, which is set the value in the text box control. Now let's look next at the show editor event. So this event fires when the editor itself is shown, and basically this is the event that is responsible for setting the field label. So before we explain this code, let's just again demonstrate what's going on. So when the user clicks on say last name, this label over here is updated to say last name, and then when the user clicks on Boston, that's updated there to say city. So if we go back to the editor, we can see that directly above the text box where the user actually does the edits, we have a static text control, which is where the label is shown, and this control has an ID which is used to update the inner HTML of the actual label itself. So let's pause here and then pick this up in the next video. So we're continuing now looking at how the editor is initialized when the user taps on a field in the form, and we can see that the syntax here is the ID of the editor and then field label. So now let's go back and look at the code here. So we'll go back to the editor and then look at the show editor code. So we can see here that basically we're updating the inner HTML of that control. But what are we updating it with? And we can see here that we're reading an object called settings, and we're reading a property called title, and we're saying that if the user didn't define his own title, then just use whatever the column name is. So in this case, the column name would be obviously either first name or last name. But let's go here to the form itself, go over to the field now, and go to this first name control. And you can see here we've got the field title in editor. Right now it's blank, which means just use the actual name, first name. But I'm going to go here and say enter user first name. So now we've defined a custom title, and let's see now how that works. So if we go now and click over there, we can see now that it says enter user first name. So basically what's happened behind the scenes is when we go and look at the code here in the editor's show editor property, basically we're reading a property out of the settings object called title, and if that property is defined, then we're going to set the inner HTML of this label to that title. Otherwise we'll just use the actual value of the column name. And then the same concept is used for help text. So in this case we don't have any help text, but you can see that the help text is also displayed in a div underneath the input control, and if there was any help for this field, we would be displaying customized help for this field. So that's what the show editor does. Now the next important event is the get value from editor. So this is the event that fires when the editor is closed. So recall that when we click the save button over here, we are basically committing the editor set. So when the editor set gets committed, the editor itself gets closed, and when the editor is closed, the get value code executes. So if we go look at this here, we can see what get value does is it reads the value out of the input control. So this is the input control where the user actually typed the value in, and we just return that value to the calling code, and that's all that's necessary in order to actually update the form with the new value. So if we go here and we run this now, so you can see now I'm going to go there and type in a value. So Harry, hit the save button, which is going to cause the editor set to close, which is then going to cause the editor's get value event to fire, and it fires, and then you can see the form gets updated over there with Harry. So there's a fair amount going on when you click on a field in a form, but essentially what's happening is we have a single editor that is shared among many fields, and we have a settings object that can be used to customize the editor. So even though it's a shared editor, the field label got updated, the help text got updated, and we can also update many other aspects of the editor as well by passing settings in, and these settings are all defined in the form itself. So when we went here to the form, you can see we set a value for the field title and for the help text, but you can also add an arbitrary number of settings over here. There's no limit to the number of settings you can do, and whatever you add to the settings object over here will be available to you in the code that is called when the editor itself is opened up. Thanks very much for watching.